So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Franz Tifo, and I'll be leading a conversation on why having a diversity program is the right thing to do. Really want to preface this by talking about the fact that really, as professionals here, we really want to talk about the business need behind diversity programs, more specifically, how certain particular programs affect the business of what we do in the medtech space. Some of it new to the medtech space in general, like supplier diversity and the importance behind that. We'll have a conversation around that and how each of these organizations can help, and then also look at it from the downstream effect of some of our businesses. So my name is Franz Tifo. I'm Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging for Edwards Lifesciences. I'll be moderating this conversation, and then joining me are Sabrina Kent, who is right here in the suit here representing the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce as their Executive Vice President of Programs and External Affairs. We have Susan Allen, who's the CEO and National President of the U.S. Pan Asian American Chamber of Commerce. Cynthia Yamaro, who is representing the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as their Senior VP of Corporate Relations, and then Sarah Hussain, who is actually the head of D&I for ResMed, another one of our MedTech partners. So a little bit about Edwards. We are a company of, at this point, a little over 18,000 employees based here in Irvine. We produce heart valves globally and located in over 40 countries. 95% of our products, we're number one in the global position in doing that. And really part of this is really around innovation for us, speed to innovation, and really the diversity of thought being part of our, what we call a secret sauce and one of our piling initiatives. So really a little bit of our company, wanted to be able to have people learn a little bit more about that. And as I do it, I want to allow each of these panelists to talk about their organizations and how they impact the space. So we'll start off with Sabrina speaking about the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you so much, Franz. We're the last thing standing between y'all and a bar, so we're going to try and keep it light and exciting this afternoon. But Franz, thank you so much for including me and NGLCC in the conversation today. We've known each other for almost a decade now in Franz's past life before being in this space, but NGLCC is the certifying body for businesses that are majority owned, operated, and controlled by an LGBTQ person or persons. And that really allows these businesses to enter corporate supply chains, like at Edwards, for example, so that they can expand their enterprises and provide goods and services through corporate supply chains. We work with over 450 corporations that accept our certification. We have nearly 55 LGBT affiliate chambers across the country here in the U.S. and about 27 more globally in over 30 countries. And the whole premise is expanding opportunities for LGBTQ business enterprises, but also to help corporate America and our multinational corporations along in the journey, whether that be through their lines of business, but also from a retention perspective, an ERG perspective, from helping them build the most inclusive companies possible. So really excited to be here today with some amazing colleagues.
Thank you. With that said, I will turn it over to Susan to talk a little about the U.S. Pan Asian American Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much, Fran. Is it on?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Like Sabrina, I've known Franz for a long time, maybe longer than 10 years. And I want to thank you for including USPAC. That's the short name for the U.S. Pan Asian American Chamber of Commerce Education Foundation. It is a charitable educational foundation that educates corporate America. We also have an advocacy arm which goes to Congress and the governor's mansion, and also the executive branches of the federal government as well as the states to advocate for policies that will be comfortably hospitable to Asian Americans in business. And I'll tell you more about it later, hopefully, if there's enough time. We are 39 years old, and I am the founder. The year that I got got my law license, I was asked to join a group that will help the Pan-Asian American community who were stereotyped as you make good fried rice with a sour pork and great kimchi and great curry, and you also wash people's dirty laundry. And I was a lawyer. I was offended by being told that you speak good English. I immigrated from Hong Kong through an invitation from the White House because of my volunteer work for people with disabilities, and I was picked as one youngster to come to America, and I came and became a lawyer, got 2 law degrees. I was very proud of it. I spoke the Queen's English, and my English now has been bastardized into the American slang when I went back to Hong Kong. And then I said, well, you speak good English. I thought, my English is better than yours. What do you mean? And I said, well, we use the telephone too to counter that. At any rate, that's how we were looked at that time, 39 years ago. And as a young lawyer, I was asked to go to a meeting that will form the U.S. PAC. And that's where I am today. 39 years later, I became the national president and CEO. And in June, I took 1/3 of my job, chairman of the board, national president, and the CEO, and took away the president and only keep the CEO job myself. And my job now is to evangelize the message of Pan-Asian American in all places in America, particularly in the medical field. Do you know that 11.7% of America's healthcare workers are Asian American? I just want to leave it at that for you. So why is applied diversity important? For your industry, because of the large number of Asian Americans in this field, it is to your advantage to get it to know who we are. And Asian Americans are the most misunderstood or understood group in America. For clinical trial, sure, my membership, I represent the top 20% of Asian Americans, the multi-billion-dollar companies, and the low 20% of Asian Americans who are also underrepresented. Those are the folks who have difficulty in accessing healthcare. They are plagued by or troubled by cancer, cervical cancer, lung cancer, hepatitis B, and all that. And very few who know about that. You guys need to do more research in this market, not only in America, but all over the world. And our advocacy program is very active in Congress. We're quiet. We're the silent water that runs deep. People don't know what we do. We're not noisy about it. We don't brag about it. And that's how we're effective. And we have an EBRG program that's 7 years old. It's called Employee Business Resource Group that help Asian Americans who wanted to find a voice in corporate America, who feel not included. They feel they don't belong. They feel that they're not understood. They feel that the voice have not been heard. First of all, they're too quiet. They feel that if they are the nail that sticks out on the floor, they will be hammered down. Like the tall tree that tend to catch the snow and storm and the sleet, they feel that way. And the EBRG at USPAC will help them, encourage them to reach out to the other groups like the other ethnic groups and learn from them as to how do you form an affinity group? How do you become effective? When you run into the CEO in the elevator, what do you say to him or her? Those are things that we want to teach them. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Cynthia?
Thank you, Franz. Thank you for having me. Welcome, everyone. And while I've not known you for 10 years, Franz, I know Franz has been an advocate and a friend of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for many, many years. I serve as the Senior Vice President of Corporate Relations. The United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we represent 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses across the country. In addition, we serve as the umbrella organization for over 260 local chamber and business associations across America. And we represent close to 200 corporate partners. Very grateful to be a part of this conversation. Diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate America and across all industries is critical, especially in healthcare. We've been around for 47 years. We were founded to advocate on behalf of Hispanic businesses who at the time were underrepresented, still are underrepresented. We advocate on the Hill. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., but have a presence across the country. So thank you, Franz, for allowing us to be a part of this critical conversation.
Sure. Well, thank you. And then finally, we get to turn to another corporate colleague, Sarah, talking about ResMed.
We've known each other a whole 5 minutes, so it's such a joy being here. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with this esteemed panel, and for all of you for taking the time to indulge with us this conversation. I joined ResMed about 3 years ago, and my first question is, how many of you snore or know someone that snores? Yeah. No, 1 in 9 of us have obstructed breathing, and ResMed makes the CPAP machines that really helps in terms of helping with their breathing. And most of our patients come to us from their partners, even their pets. We have some great patient stories of people's pets that keep jumping on them when they're sleeping. So I've learned a lot about sleep. My background's actually in international development. I started off my life in D.C., really focusing on refugee camps, democracy development work, found my way to tech 10 years ago when social media became a thing, and blogging, and then I entered the tech space. I was in telecommunications, and then I moved into the people side of the business, really helping us think about how do we retain talent, attract talent, how do people build teams that are innovative and productive. And this is 10 years ago when we started not using the words that we use now. Now we're using DEIBA, and we're throwing out those letters, and it's been exciting seeing the industry evolve. ResMed now, we've had a diversity and inclusion team for 3 years, and we lead with belonging. So the team is called BIDS, Belonging, Inclusion, Diversity for Success. And we have employee resource groups that, build and foster our Asian community, Hispanic, Black, people with disabilities, caregivers, parents. We have 17 employee resource groups right now. So we are global. We're 12,000 people. We operate in 41 countries, and we sell our products in 150 countries. So feel free to ask any questions afterwards if you want to learn more about obstructed breathing or D&I.
Thanks. So really, as we start this conversation, I really wanted to start off by, talking about, so we have 3 chambers here. We're talking about diversity programs, and sort of how does that really relate within the medtech space? And so for our perspective in Edwards, I myself came to the company almost 3 years ago, and one of the first things that we were asked to do by both our CFO as well as our leader of public affairs was to start a supplier diversity program. So technically inside the company, from a diversity perspective, obviously we want to lead from that and be able to put in programs that really give people inclusion and a sense of belonging. But, what would really be the importance in bringing in a supplier diversity program, and why really in the medtech space does that really help? And I will say one of the things that we solve, and I think most of the companies in the medtech space can say, is that really we are having problems from a clinical trial perspective and really being able to be more inclusive in the dynamics and the statistics of the people that participate in the majority of the trials within the medtech space, or really in the pharma space in general. And a lot of that with certain groups and certain constituencies is around hesitancy. And hesitancy, especially when you're talking a space like ours where the majority of the companies aren't well known. Not everybody's Medtronic, not everybody's J&J, and a lot of us aren't in the pharma space where people get to see commercials and see these big names. So really when the reality is you have to now gain that trust before you ask to participate. You have to be able to explain to them why the benefit of this is important, especially with certain demographics that are the most hesitant. They're also the most vulnerable. By participating in supplier diversity, really you're also helping those communities, and you're actually able to have a tool and a vehicle to show that support for the community and help tell your story. So that's really one of the reasons why we did into it. And really what I want to do is to share some time with each of the chambers to talk about some of the activities, both either with us or some other organizations, where they show sort of the value to the company, not only in doing it, not just for the sake of saying that they're doing something for the community, it's also helpful to their business, but it helps show the economic impact. And so I will turn to Sabrina to just talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing from that perspective and why that also helps from a standpoint of helping those companies.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Franz. I think it's a really unique position to be an LGBTQ advocacy organization in today's world, because on the one hand, we get to work on the supplier diversity side of things, which I mentioned is creating those opportunities or connecting our businesses with opportunities in corporate supply chains across every industry, right? So whether that's AI and robotics or manufacturing, to the gay things like interior design and so forth, we do it all, and that's incredible for our companies to be able to come in and provide niche innovation into larger companies and help them serve their supply base, but also their consumers as well, and then directly invest back in our companies who are then investing in more diverse talent and diverse people. But then on the other side, we get to do the advocacy work, whether that is on LGBTQ issues, marriage, the anti-trans legislation that's passing all across this country right now, but then also bringing our companies, our corporate partners along for that journey, whether it's having them sign on in support or against some of these anti-trans and homophobic bills, or helping educate them to better serve their consumers, their customers, and also, again, their internal customers, their team members, by being able to live those values and then also reflect that back in their company so that they are bringing on board the best talent to support the development and delivery of their goods and services, or in this case, particularly building that trust within our communities. We're living in a time where the consumer isn't just sitting around with turning maybe a blind eye, for lack of a better term, to what companies are doing in living their values and their practices. I always want to know where companies are investing their dollars, whether it be with LGBTQ-owned enterprises or diverse enterprises broadly, where they are advocating when it comes to local and national politics, and that gets reflected in the work that companies are doing with organizations like NGLCC, USHCC, and USPAC. That's why we work together in the National Business Inclusion Consortium to weigh in on issues that collectively affect our minority and diverse business communities, and not just the diverse segments that we represent as LGBTQ people. We're women, we're folks with disabilities, we're veterans, we're minorities, and so much more. And so together, we work together to make sure that our businesses are gaining access to opportunities, but that the corporate partners we serve are, once they're bringing our businesses into the fold, are actually able to embrace them with open arms, that an LGBTQ-owned business isn't going to lose a contract when the procurement manager finds out that they're LGBTQ. In terms of some of the work that we're doing broadly with companies, particular success stories, like Franz was asking about, it varies, right? We really will sit down with a company and find out what their needs are. We get to, like I said, do the advocacy work, the procurement work, but we also get to come in and sit down with ERGs and DEI leaders and find out what a company needs in order to be successful. Whether we're able to provide that knowledge base to them or bring them LGBTQ-owned contractors that can do that and bring them along in that journey, we can. So, for example, Pride. We see the majority of corporate America participates in Pride during the month of June. That's fantastic. What we can do is bring LGBTQ-owned businesses in to help drive that marketing campaign, to help buy, in essence, the loyalty and support of the community, but in an authentic way, to understand that the messaging is there, to understand that individuals in your company are coming in and participating in that process as well. So when it comes down to it, it's a unique model, right? We have 450 corporations across every single industry, and at the end of the day, we're able to bring in our expertise and the suppliers that we serve in order to help drive outcomes, both in the supply chain, within the company, and in the marketplace.
Cool. Thank you. And real quick, Cynthia, I think that second piece for some of these corporations would be really good to talk about what you do from a standpoint of helping with the ERGs internally, because I think the ability for best practices is also something that all three of these organizations have in common. So examples to let organizations know, okay, so beyond supplier diversity, how else are you seeing best practices from a standpoint of representation within their employee base?
No, certainly. Thanks for that question, Franz. And like Sabrina, the USHCC, or United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we represent a diverse corporate population, many industries, health in the tech space, space technology, mom and pops, those restaurants, storefronts, 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses across the country. And what we like to share with our corporate partners is that ERGs can be leveraged as an employee retention tool. Not just retention, but also recruitment. When your employees feel included and they see individuals that are reflective of them, it brings them a sense of belonging and productivity that you probably wouldn't see otherwise. And so what we do at the United States Hispanic Chamber is we foster employee resource groups by supporting corporations in helping them to develop ERGs. And also we celebrate employee resource groups at our national conference every year. Celebrate your employees, your workforce. But we have often found that corporations now are really, again, leveraging ERGs as a retention and a recruitment tool. And so what I would love to hear from a MedTech perspective is, how could organizations like ours support you in growing your ERGs and really leveraging your workforce to retain a greater talent pool?
I'd love to say something to that, if that's possible. So one thing that you said about ERGs, so a lot of them are branded as BRGs, business resource groups, because depending on what your product is, you can leverage your in-house talent to help you with your product. A lot of companies have done that. And so that's a great way for you to just tap into the conversation. I can say for us, our ERGs, we've partnered with chambers in San Diego to help us with their supplier diversity pipeline outreach, building our talent, community events. And so that's just been a really great way, not only to your point about building belonging, but also building the company brand and awareness of the brand and the product in that community.
Absolutely. I mean, when one feels celebrated, they feel included, right?
And that is why we call our organizations a subgroup called EBRG, because we want the employer to feel that there is something for them to invest in addition to building employee morale. And that's why we call it Employee Business Resource Group. And that has been a welcome addition, one more alphabet in the name, EBRG, Employee Business Resource Group. We started that to help the Asian Americans. Oh, by the way, for the NBIC, National Business Inclusion Consortium, USPAC was the first one to say yes to NGLCC when they had that idea of bringing other groups together to support NGLCC, which is National LGBT Chamber of Commerce initiation to bring other groups together, join NGLCC, to come together as a group to promote a cause of bringing people together. So I was the only CEO who showed up. U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce CEO did not show up. Other CEO did not show. They sent lieutenants. So, but they are the worker bees. Okay? I am a working CEO. So, but what I want to share with you is that America's supply diversity came out of the EOC, the affirmative action movement that came all the way back to President Roosevelt and Eisenhower and Nixon. And then slowly it changed into minority business development and now supply diversity, because America's demographics have changed. Some years ago, I think about 10 years ago, there was prediction that the Hispanic community will outgrow other community, become the largest minority group. By golly, by the year 2000, we were warned, and they have become the largest minority group in the country. then second, the African American group, and then the Asian slow group falling behind. But Asian American is the fastest growing group in the country, and it is, however, it's a quiet group. Have given the name the model minority, meaning that they're quiet, but they are very good at everything. You don't have to take care of them. You don't have to keep the door open to them. They are considered white in the mainstream. So Asian American are called the bananas. Yellow on the outside, white on the inside. And as a result, they have a lot of disadvantages, particularly in minority business contracting and now supply diversity. Folks would look at us and say, sometimes look at Asian American walking into a room and saying, why are you here? You're already successful. But what they do not know is there are, for every one Asian American who is successful, there are more than 9 who are not. And those, the 9 are the ones that we have to take care of. That's why supply diversity is so important. And we have a lot to contribute to, a lot. And don't know whether you know about that, the recent decision called Ultima Service Corporation versus Department of Agriculture, where the district court in Louisiana said that giving a contract to a white woman over the black woman business owner over a white woman is unconstitutional because it's based on race. There's going to be a lot of discussion about that, and I think what we have to do as an organization is to work together, find solutions, compromises, so that everybody will be happy. That we should not have recrimination, say, I have to win, you have to lose, I'm going to stay here and put my feet firmly on the ground. We got to work. I think corporation will begin to be the leader in doing so, because like in the medical profession, you want to get out there and reach everybody, particularly in the medical field. It's a minority, including Asian Americans, who do not have access to the proper healthcare and delivery system because we have preferences, we have experiences, we have certain cultural stereotypes. We don't want to give blood because we believe giving some part of our body is a bad thing. So all that educational campaign has to get into our community to tell them that it's okay to give some blood. It's okay to take those tests because it's good for you and for everybody.
And to speak of that, I was going to ask, but you bring up a very good point. In being able to participate with these organizations, an additional thing that we also tend to do is with all your organizations, and starting off with, I believe we did with USACC, around communication to your groups around education within healthcare, because that is a third piece of what these organizations do. And can you talk a little bit, Cynthia, about some of the communication tools that we use? So, for instance, educating with aortic stenosis. How would, let's say, an organization in the medtech space talking about a particular disease or things that they want their communities to be educated on? I know we've done a couple of those with USACC. Could you talk about some of those examples and how that can help from that perspective?
Certainly, absolutely. I mean, we have a pool. I talked about, we represent 5 million Hispanic businesses across the country, but I also like to mention that we also represent their workforce and we represent their families. And so the number is pretty grand. And we often partner with our corporate partners to educate our Hispanic businesses, their workforce, and their families by way of small private roundtables. We can host webinars. We have 3 signature events that we host across the country. We have monthly conversations with our local chambers across the country. We have 6 chambers that are represented on our board of directors, and so we often speak to those communities directly. And so healthcare and education is one of the most critical topics for our chamber and for our membership right now. And so there are several ways in which you as a healthcare industry can get involved. So long as the educational, the message is in alignment with our mission, we're happy to to work on your behalf and represent you in a way that will educate our constituents, chambers, and in their workforce again, and also those Hispanic businesses across the country. So there are multiple ways in which we can partner. We, of course, would like for you to be a member and share like-minded mission, but there are multiple ways in which that we can partner and get the message out.
And one
educate our
additional way I
members.
wanted to also highlight is through their email blasts. So to all the communities as well that they represent, we actually did a campaign with the marketing end of our organization that handles things like aortic stenosis. And just simply sending a message around aortic stenosis to the Hispanic community was just something that we wanted to start off and do with them last year. So we used their email blast that they send out on a regular basis to that entire community to educate them on what that looks like, what are the symptoms that you see, the fact that for every person that gets diagnosed with severe AS, 50% of them die within 2 years. And that's something that just letting the community know that serious thing is something that can be activated. Because one of the biggest things that we conquer with, which is very similar to a lot of medtech spaces, is access and referral. So if you think about a lot of these communities, part of the reason why, which I will definitely let Sarah lead as the expert, that they have issues in finding out information is, you know, if your primary physician is someone that's a generalist who's overloaded because you're using a local community instinct as opposed to system experts that have opportunity to or resources, that already sets you at a deficit. So being able to just educate sometimes their healthcare providers is as equally important, because they may not know what it looks like and what they need to do to refer them to a specialist.
Franz, one thing that I failed to mention before you hand it over to Sarah is language is key. And so we often partner with our corporate members to provide that translation to our membership. The majority of our membership obviously speak English. However, they're, again, mentioning their families and their workforce often speak Spanish only. And so we partner with our corporate members to provide that language access, which is critical.
Oh, thank you. And really, what I wanted to turn it over to, Sarah, is really talking about how does that impact when we talk about the business that we're all in, that piece around the title of this conversation, you know, why is it important to have it? Really, can you start to talk about the impacts of clinical trials, what the representation is, and why it's so important, just as a business aspect, to really look at solving some of those issues?
Yeah, no, great. So it's so important that if your company does have an inclusion and diversity department or team, that you have a strategy, a set strategy in place. Just out of curiosity, how many of you do have diversity and inclusion rep or team? Oh, it's like a good, oh, it's good, 50, 60%. One thing when I came into ResMed, there's the people practices component, which I think most of us naturally default to. We automatically think, oh, building diversity on teams or inclusion building through, you know, celebrating ERGs. But there's a huge component, especially in med tech, for us to think about leveraging our products and thinking about inclusive design, thinking about accessibility, and how are you designing for everyone. So that's one component. And so think about your strategies and going back to your stakeholders and asking those questions around what are we doing around accessibility, user testing, and usability, making sure that you're accounting for dexterity, visual impairment, any sort of human way of life and condition and lifestyle. So that's one component. The other branch as well is thinking about the testing that goes into your products, and that is a big part of the D in diversity. So it's not just cultivating rich and diverse teams, it's also about making sure that you're actually testing your product on a diverse market. And that's actually been a really big challenge, and if you were to go to look at your data, I encourage you to ask those questions. Who are we testing on? Are our registrants getting back? I'll tell you at ResMed, it's been a challenge baking in more and more diversity. We're seeing year-on-year improvement. I'm happy about that, but it is a targeted outreach to every community, every age. And then thinking about, are we testing on people with dwarfism? Are we testing on Down syndrome? Are we testing on children? How are we collecting the data to make sure that we're designing a product that's truly inclusive of everyone? And so there's a whole element of our outreach strategy. There's a whole element of our communication strategy. What are we saying in our emails? Are we using the languages that we need to use? And are we using the right words? I think there are multiple languages on this panel. And I can tell you that if I were to talk about sleep, I would not translate it the same way in another language. I might say, oh, we look at sleep, or we might study sleep, but you would never say in some languages research sleep, because there are some communities that will immediately not want to engage. And so we have to be very intentional about how we building diversity in our trials, and it is a challenge. We have our whole medical affairs team on that I get to partner with, and really thinking about the patient stories. We've talked a lot about storytelling at this conference and the importance of storytelling, and you see that in your agendas in front of you. And it is so important as a company that you tell diverse stories. People need to see themselves reflected. I would love to see more patients with curly hair. That would be great, right? Like, we need to see ourselves reflected, so I feel like, okay, they're having an experience I can relate to. I see me, that company sees me, right? And so I'm really working with ResMed on that too, is whose patient testimonials are we taking? So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So be mindful of saying that you do D&I, because doing D&I takes years to measure, and you really have to look at it holistically, from the product to the packaging to the trials to your people practices.
And really, on top of what Sarah just said, with those of us in the medtech space where, beyond a CPAP or sleeping solution, where we're actually putting things in people's bodies, as you know, there's certain regulations, there's approvals, there are certain things that you have to go through in the clinical trial process, and you have to show proof. And so when you're talking about being able to show proof to a broader audience from a perspective of your diversity within your subject matter, it becomes even more important to your business. We're in a business right now where, if you looked at it in the med space in general, somewhere around 90% of the participants are Caucasian. Somewhere around 70% of the participants are male. Well, that is not the demographics of the United States. So when you're going through an approval process for your product, and you have to then prove that this can work in an expanded group of people beyond your clinical, how do you do that when you really haven't represented the population in your study? So it becomes even harder to get approvals that way. So if you think about it, it's actually advantageous to be more diverse in your clinical trials for continued business success long term. So with that in mind as well, how do we really work through with the chambers on communication? So we talked a little bit about it from USHCC's perspective. Sabrina, it'd be really good to talk about it from your perspective, because I know you use different avenues too to take in information. That also helps really with policymakers as well, because access is a different point. And I know we've worked and spoken through that, especially when it comes to the medical community.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Franz. So a lot of the similar channels that USHCC mentioned, I'm not going to reshare those, but I will say what we see with a lot of our partnerships and building trust within our community is based on, I would say, the holistic nature of that partnership. I'll use an example of a large financial institution that we work with, and their end goal is ideally for LGBTQ business owners to take out business loans and open business accounts with their company. As LGBTQ people, you may or may not know that depending on where you are in this country, you can be denied a loan based on the fact that you're LGBTQ and the perception of that, right? And so that can be very hard to prove, and recourse could look very different for, let's say, a black trans woman in New York City than it does for a black trans woman in Alabama. And so what we do with this company is they're not only supporting our LGBTQ-owned businesses by employing them in their supply chains, they're investing in our affiliate chambers to do programs across the country where they're not just tapping into the LGBTQ business owner network, but again, the employees of their companies and the residents of those given areas to build trust within those communities and tackle issues of importance as it relates to financial literacy and so much more, for them to be able to understand how their products and services can better serve the community. And as a result of that, they identify challenges and barriers for LGBTQ people in investing with their bank. They then also work with us on a national scale to ensure that they are educating folks within their company on LGBTQ literacy, how to talk to our community, how to ensure that their doors are open when a same-sex couple wants to approach them for a loan on their new home. And in doing so, we're building that trust within the community. So similar to the clinical trial process, our community wants to come back and invest with them and understand also now that I have been able to interact with this company at various levels, I can now say when I go to my local branch, here's X person that's going to be an advocate for me and for my family when it comes down to making big decisions that are ultimately going to affect our livelihoods. So I like to look at that as a holistic partnership model because it touches on the business side of things, the affiliate chamber side of things, then also the corporate ERG and DEI side of things where we're educating folks within the company that may or may not be members of the LGBTQ community as well.
And then I'll say one other piece of work that we tend to do. One of those with Susan is really around, Sarah mentioned it, language, right? So we're in a business where if you think about our largest opportunity in our largest business, the average age of our average patient is somewhere around 70 years old. So when you think about reaching a particular community like the Asian American community, at that age group, most people think about, communication, we're going to send them information. Everything we're going to do, things like email blasts. Well, you can verify this, that the majority of the people that age range here in this country tend to receive information not only in native language, but in native contact, which means they tend to look at local newspapers that still print in their native language. So for us to communicate something like aortic stenosis, or for us to reach out to them about the best things they can do from a healthcare perspective, not knowing those newspapers or those accesses, it would be to partner with someone like Susan and their organization to say, okay, this is what we have, this is what we want to say to them, how do we do that? And we've partnered with her organization and saying, okay, we're going to reach this community this way. These are the 10 newspapers that this community tends to listen to. This is the way you want to frame the messaging so that it's respected and you don't scare them, basically. And then that's really the way you communicate in front of them because, they're not the experts on aortic stenosis, but they're experts on the people in their community. And that's really what we're trying to highlight today is around how we can work through these relationships to really better focus our business and really being able to reach out to a much higher community in a very technical environment that we work in. And so with that said, we have a little bit of time that we wanted to open it up to the audience for questions. I don't want to just have us be speaking here up on the stage. So, if anybody had any questions or want to make any comments, we have, I believe, 2 mics right here where, we can hopefully have a few brave souls to come and ask us some questions. Anybody want to take a first bite?
While we're waiting, why don't I just follow up on your very studied and expert commentary on the Asian American community. We have more than 35 subgroups within our community, okay? And we speak more than 100 languages and dialects. However, 75% of the Asian Americans are like me, immigrants, once upon a time, and sons and daughters of immigrants. 3 generations could very easily be living in the same household. That's why when census took their census, the Asian American household income tend to be higher because they have more wage earners within the same household. Now, because of the complexity and diversity of the Pan-Asian American, that's why we call ourselves Pan-Asian. It's easy to remember, right? Pan, like a frying pan, like a walk from rim to rim, from the Pacific Rim all the way across the continental United States to across the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. So we represent the Pan-Asian American rather than Asian American, Native American, Pacific Island, and maybe we'll have some more to that. So we're trying to promote Pan-Asian American community. That's why we, as an organization, have been selected by the Small Business Administration for the $100 million 2-year nationwide program to reach out to the underserved and unserved Asian American businesses who were hardest hit among all groups, Black, Hispanic, Native American, by COVID-19. Because we know the community, we know how to reach them by radio, television, when to buy television ads, not when politicians are running office, like here in California, you're forever running for office. The politicians are always buying radio ads or TV ads. So we know where to go, when to go, what to say to them, the choices of words, and don't use those words which means ghost, okay, or death. Use the words which means prosperity and life, so that when you talk to them, they mean, oh, that means good luck charm for them. That's why we were the trusted ambassador to represent the SBA and say, go and use the SBA services because they are there to help you. Thank you for that promo.
No problem.
And
So-
that's also just to really add on to that. That's your ERGs can help you with language. So many times we've had to tap our ERGs like, can you vet this? So we worked with an outside vendor, but we still want to make sure this lands. It's another great way to leverage your ERGs.
And some of our corporate members actually use the ERG as focus groups to say, what do we have to do in order to get into that market? And send them to events like ours, conferences, regional events. I don't have 200 and some affiliates to represent. I only have 6 regional chapters in the most critical states with the highest population, with the largest long arm to reach, because we don't have the money to manage 200 some relationships. You know how hard it is. Even with the $100 million program, we reach out to 14 affiliates. It's like raising 14 kids. They all want their own bedroom, their own toys. It's very hard. But we're succeeding. We're getting some very good, critically important, successful story to show Congress that you invested well, at least with the Asian Americans, because it's having a positive impact. Yeah, language is important. Get using your EBRG folks to be your ambassador. Go into the community, because they will be so proud to work for a company that want them to go to their community and talk for them. Because they say, you see, my company cares for me. And therefore, that's why I'm here to talk to you. And that's how you got the company brand out there, too.
Makes sense. Any questions? We have a brave soul.
I had a question. So I'm actually from a company that's smaller and doesn't have ERGs. I have worked for a hospital that has ERGs, but in the system of having, or the ecosystem of a smaller company, how do we keep a focus on diversity and the importance of it year round, and convince it there's something that we can take up space, like, rather than just having a pride celebration? What do you think is the best way to go about that if we don't have the resources to make, or to have any sort of other external resources when it's just like 2 people?
Well, I would say, and can turn it to these organizations from a corporate perspective, that's one of the reasons why I invited these organizations to be here. They will help when you don't have the resources, at least to show you what most organizations are doing in this space to continue to do it. But I think the best way is to advocate it from a business perspective. So some of the things that we talked about, like clinical trial participation, because the majority of companies coming to this conference are in a space where they have to do that. And it's about reaching markets that are diverse. And really, I think gaining support from that perspective and seeing a key stakeholder that understands that if they don't expand clinical trials, I would say maybe working with your clinical affairs team, people that are responsible for doing those, maybe working with your medical affairs team, people that are responsible for researching that, advocating that, trying to open access to your business. And then, of course, your sales organizations are really the first 3 places that I think you should look at to see about support and giving them that business reason why, to help gain resources, right? Because a majority, if you think about it, there are a lot of small medtech companies that aren't going to have all those resources. But then I also say, once you gain sort of the support of wanting to do it, as far as extra resources, these are the organizations that will help you externally in being able to provide, guidance, what are other companies doing, maybe even helping with spreading the word. As we said, we have used these organizations just to be able to reach communities that we normally wouldn't have access to. And I think those probably are the best ways to get started.
I'd love to add. Oh, okay. I didn't catch your name. What was your name? Michaela, great question. It's true, sometimes a lot of D&I teams or companies are under-resourced in this space. I definitely encourage you to find some champions internally. Look for some leaders and start setting up some meetings to see who would be an internal champion for you. And start small. Start with maybe 1 or 2 goals. And have them also help be the voice for you within the company. That's going to really help with some of the things we've talked about today, but you're going to start with getting an executive sponsor. That'll really help.
And if I could also just add, we've talked a lot about EBRG work and DEIB from the context of the marketplace and the consumer, but I touched on it briefly earlier. A company's greatest asset is not its product or its service, but it's the people that power it, right? So there's a whole other side to this conversation we could spend another hour and a half talking about, which is the recruitment and retention side of things. So it's when you're building your business case, in addition to finding those internal champions and advocates and understanding how those DEIB values relate to the core line of business, it's also understanding that it's a bottom line conversation as well, right? I'm not going to stay in a company as an LGBTQ person that doesn't allow me to bring my full self to work. But when we get to engage by bringing our identities, whether they're our Pan-Asian identities, our LGBTQ identities, and so forth, to the table, we're bringing value to the company, right? Whether that is working within the communities that we represent and serve, like Susan talked about, but our company is putting an imperative on that and listening to our voices and showing us that we're a space here to belong and bring those values back into the company and the products that we're serving. Those are places that we want to stay because it's more than just collecting a paycheck. It costs a company 3 times as much as one person's annual salary to rehire and retrain somebody new. So you're brought into that company because they're invested in you, and it's a financial output on them if they lose you, because you're not in an environment where you're being supported. So there are sort of 2 lines of business to sort of make that case in terms of why inclusion matters, even if you don't necessarily have the funds to support an EBRG in the way some larger companies may.
Anybody else?
Hi, everyone. I think a lot of people believe that diversity hire means that you hired somebody because they were a diversity candidate, even though they were not the most qualified because they were a woman or a person of color. How would you address that criticism?
I'll take a shot at that. We often, when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, ERG groups, et cetera, we as a business organization, we hear that criticism all the time. And as a Hispanic community, we're not asking for a handout. We just want to have a seat at the table. So we encourage our corporate partners, and when we receive that criticism, it's really about creating a level playing field. We want an opportunity. We want to compete for the opportunity. We don't want to be a box that a corporation checks. Even as an organization that represents Hispanic businesses and minority groups, our CEO says very often that being Hispanic is really a state of mind, and we're Americans first. And so we don't want to hand out. We don't want to be a box that you check. We just want an opportunity. We want to level the playing field. And so we try to drown out all that noise because we hear it all the time, not only from our corporate partners, but quite often from our Hispanic businesses that are members.
Well, and I'll address it, and maybe, I don't know, Sarah, if you want to as well, but I mean, from a corporate perspective, I know what we usually address is, it is always on an individual basis, but in any time where I've actually been criticized that from either this company or another place where I stood, I talked about, okay, what particular situation were you talking about? Because usually what ends up happening is that candidate was not only diverse, but they worked on an assignment that you didn't. They got exposure to different opportunities and different levels of experience that you didn't potentially know about maybe in the interview process. And then we talk through all of the things that are related to the job that they got and why they got it. And that usually helps address it. And then also, we're very transparent in our interview process, both internally and externally, where we talk about the broad base of candidates that were there to interview. So it's really about opening up the opportunity to the best candidate and not just being more specific, because the entire idea is, to the argument made, most people work, talk, deal business with who they know. And so if they don't, by the sheer force of expand to areas where they've never been before, they don't get the exposures to new candidate. And we're in a business where we have to innovate. And innovation is all about bringing in different ideas as opposed to doing the same thing over and over again. And that's, from our perspective, the argument we make.
It's really important to reframe the conversation and the narrative. So you're right, this exists. I've seen it so many countries. I've seen it in conferences where leaders have said this, and it's so important to engage with your recruiters and hiring managers and have these conversations. A lot of times hiring managers will send back resumes, and I've coached our recruiters to come back and say, well, tell me more about this candidate. Why not? We're looking at the value. We're looking at requirements. At the end of the day, it goes back to being able to do the job. And so having conversations with hiring managers directly is really important to unpack the conversation. And then also training your recruiters in terms of how to diversify the pipeline and making sure that the talent is out there. A lot of times they'll come back and say, oh, we're not finding diverse talent. There's talent. How do we source? And then you have to have a strong sourcing strategy to make sure that you are out there, you have strong partnerships, and the talent's out there. You just have to look out, you have to look for it.
Thank you so much.
It all depends on what the hiring corporation wants. Is the scope of the work, the type of work, the circumstances, and the extent to which you value one over the other. Do you want more minorities or diverse people in your organization for particular purposes? Or do you want particular people who are good in particular area in order for the company to advance in particular areas? Or do you want to have the notion that company is fair, equal, judge people by whatever standards, so that other folks will look at it, that's a company that is a wholesome company, that is not slanted on one side or the other. Depends on the situation. And right now, the Asian Americans are caught in the middle because of the decisions of the Supreme Court on student for fair admission versus Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The Asian Americans caught, they're split on that decision that the Supreme Court says that Harvard's admission policy, which used race to exclude Asian Americans from getting into Harvard because there are too many Asian Americans achieving the grade point average of the others on quantifiable quantifiable measurements to judge a student's capability to succeed at Harvard should go into Harvard. So that is framed by the press as an affirmative action decision. The press has a broadcaster has promoted as a Supreme Court has struck down affirmative action, but that is a race-based discrimination decision, where Harvard was sued by the Asian American students for excluding them based upon their race as Asian Americans, just like in the 1800s when Chinese Americans were excluded from entering the United States based upon them being Chinese. That's called the very famous Chinese Exclusion Act. Very famous Chinese Exclusion Act. One law in the United States that is exclusively targeted against one ethnic group, the Chinese Americans, and say, we don't want you to enter this country because you are Chinese. Harvard's case for many Asian American, particular parents of students who studied very hard, gave up their basketball game, gave up, my sons didn't, they didn't go to Harvard, gave up their Nintendo and got into the grades to go to Harvard. They couldn't. The poor souls were distracted. Some actually jumped from the top of the building to commit suicide for that. And that's why the Asian Americans are so split on that, and we hope that America will understand that.
I believe you had a question.
Hi, my name's Megan, and I'm a senior recruiter at Edwards. And I hope that my question's not too similar. So I'm actually wondering if you have some advice. So I recruit for highly technical roles within Edwards, and a lot of times the positions are replacement positions, or they may be new positions, but the hiring managers often want like-minded candidates, or they want to hire a candidate that can effectively work with different functional areas and be influential within different functional areas. So I'm also a member of the DIMB committee and several ERG groups, and very passionate about being a member of those different groups. So sometimes I do find myself a bit tripped up during candidate debrief meetings where we have a few qualified candidates that are all interesting, and some are strong in one area and some are strong in another. And I start to hear things around, well, I don't think that this candidate's a fit. I don't think that this person is a cultural fit, because I don't think they'll work very well with this group. And this group has been with the company for so many years, our bread and butter. We really need them to be able to communicate with this group. I think we should go with somebody who might not be from a diverse candidate population. And that's where I really want to have the language to remind whichever business partner I'm working with that a diverse perspective is going to not only help their team, but help the organization and the patient population and humanity. So it can be difficult to get to that level when working with such technical minds that are really seeing a straight line opposed to several variables. So I was wondering if you have any advice around that that you could give to myself and maybe my Edwards recruiting friends that I'm sitting with.
Well, I would say if the candidates are, from a technical perspective, all qualified to do the role, because if it's highly technical, it's around being able to do just basically certain things for them, right? I would, probably expand the either diversity of thought or mindset of the interviewing team. I can say a couple of different organizations, and we even at Edwards are looking at as well, is really bringing in diverse people in the process. So not just the hiring manager gets to weigh in, the people that are going to work with this person, you get them to help weigh in, you bring in a couple of stakeholders to bring in. Of course, the traditional people, the person's leader, the manager's leader, but when you bring in that more holistic team, including, we're going to bring in more of their coworkers, most of the people that they're going to work with, right? And then they all have equal participation in there. What most studies and my colleagues have found, that it then tends to open up the pool naturally, because if, the only person that makes a decision is a person that is always hiring, as you said, the same people over and over again, well, you're going to get the same results. If you now, put that person in with more stakeholders, and they're not only the one that gets to make a final decision on it, but others weigh in, like the people that the person is going to work with, and then change those people around, I think you tend to naturally see more different people being brought in. Because 9 times out of 10, the manager thinks they may not get along with other people, and they usually tend to be surprised as to the result of who those people would pick. Because I think what it comes down to, if technically can do the same thing, if it's not about the technical skills of the person, just broadening who they speak to and who gets to weigh in with the manager tends to sort of lead and help people kind of be different and get out of their own shell. Because it's also a lot about their own comfort, too.
I love the fact that you asked this question, and I love the fact that you asked for something tangible. One thing to say in those meetings is, let's get back to the value that this person's going to bring to the team. I really don't like the word fit. I really encourage all of you not to use the word fit. That is such a biased term. And so really focus on the value that this candidate is bringing from this unique experience, this background, this career choice, this sabbatical. And so really use the word value to really articulate what they're going to contribute as a person on this team and how they're going to drive that. And it's hard as a recruiter to be an upstander in a meeting sometimes, but if you can really focus on that, I think it's really going to help kind of push the conversation back to the requirements for the role and for the team.
All right, thank you. Well, we're actually coming to the end of the presentation. We only have a few minutes left, but really wanted to take the time to thank you all for coming in and joining us with the great questions and the attention. We'll be here afterwards as we close if you guys have any individual questions, because sometimes it's hard to ask for a question in a group setting, but appreciate the time, appreciate you guests for imparting us with your knowledge and sharing some of your experiences here. As we said, all these leaders have organizations that can help either set up, help your ERGs, how to expand them, and then really help from a business perspective with how do we get the messaging around the solutions that you offer to specific communities that they serve. So I want to thank you all for your time and joining us today. And hopefully this was fruitful for you.
Thank you, Franz, for leading the conversation.